All right, today we are tackling a class that gives so many students a whole lot of anxiety, anatomy and physiology. But don't worry, we're going to break down exactly how you can absolutely crush it.
I mean, let's be real. Anatomy and Physiology, or ANP as we'll call it, has a reputation. It's known as one of the toughest classes out there for a reason. But what if I told you that reputation is maybe a little bit overblown?
Because getting a good grade in this class isn't really about being some kind of super genius. Honestly, when you boil it all down, success in A&P just comes from mastering 3 core types of information.
Okay, so here they are, the 3 pillars of A&P. First, you've got your definitions, all those prefixes, suffixes, and key terms. Then the diagrams, knowing what the body structures are, and, just as important, where they are. And finally, the functions, how all of those parts actually work together. If you can master these 3 things, you will master this course. So let's walk through some really powerful strategies to get you there.
First things first, your success in A&P starts way before you even walk into the classroom for a test. It actually starts before the lecture even begins. It's all about rock-solid preparation. You know, what's really cool is how these 3 simple habits work together. By just skimming the chapter beforehand, you're not walking into the lecture totally cold. You've got some context, right? Then actually showing up to every class lets you hear exactly what the professor thinks is important, and that's a huge clue for what's going to be on the exam. And this last one, rewriting your notes the same day, this is a powerful trick to fight what scientists call the forgetting curve. Basically, your brain is wired to toss out information it doesn't think is important. By reviewing it quickly, you're telling your brain, hey, pay attention, this stuff matters, and that builds a much stronger memory.
And don't underestimate the physical act of writing. It is so powerful for your memory. There's this great story from an old TV show, Growing Pains, where this character tries to cheat on a test by writing all the answers on his shoes. Well, he stayed up all night writing, and in the process, he accidentally learned everything. He ended up acing the test without even looking at his shoes. It's a funny story, but it proves a really important point. The act of writing things down makes knowledge stick.
Okay, so you've done the prep work, you've absorbed the material. So now what? Well, once you have all that information from your reading and your lectures, it's time to stop being a passive learner. You have to get active with it. And this is where something called active recall comes into play.
Look, in a class like A&P, you just can't get away from some good old-fashioned rote memorization. It's all about repetition, repetition, repetition. Seriously, make flashcards for every single key term, every prefix, every suffix. Then you just have to drill them over and over and over again until they become second nature.
And hey, here's a pro tip to make that repetition even more powerful. Say it out loud. Don't just think medial means towards the midline of the body. Say it. Like, announce it to your empty room. When you actually use your mouth to speak and your ears to hear it, you create a much stronger, more complex memory pathway in your brain. Trust me, it works.
Now this right here, this is one of the most effective active recall techniques you can possibly use, especially for the anatomy part of A&P. See, just looking at a label diagram is totally passive, but trying to recreate it from scratch, now that is active learning. So here's the process. It's super simple. You find a diagram in your textbook, let's say it's the parts of the heart. You trace the basic shape on a blank piece of paper, draw empty lines for all the labels, and then, without looking, you fill it all in from memory. Then you check your work, see what you missed, and guess what? You do it again and again. You keep doing it until you can draw and label that thing perfectly in your sleep.
All right, now we get to the really fun stuff. Let's talk about some creative tricks and brain hacks to make even the most complicated information stick.
Believe it or not, a simple, silly joke can be a super effective memory tool. This one was a classic back in biology class, right? By connecting the word epidermis, which is the outer layer of skin, to a funny, kind of embarrassing social situation, you create this memorable link in your brain that is really, really hard to forget.
This next technique, visual imagery, is on a whole other level. I'm not kidding. This is how memory champions do crazy things like memorize the exact order of an entire deck of shuffled cards. You just take a boring piece of information and you attach it to a vivid and often totally ridiculous movie in your head.
So for example, there is this A&P teacher who taught her students about a really obscure muscle called the obturator muscle. How? By connecting it to that song, Smooth Operator. She made up this funny little story in her head about some guy trying to be a smooth operator and getting slapped. The story was so vivid and funny that her students never, ever forgot that muscle's name or where it was located.
Now, whenever you have to remember a list or a sequence or the order of things,
Mnemonic devices are going to be your absolute best friend. Think of them like little memory shortcuts that give your brain a simple hook to hang complex information on.
A classic example is this one right here, an acrostic for remembering the 5 types of white blood cells, in order from the most common to the least. This silly sentence, "Never let a monkey eat bananas," is super easy to remember. Then, the first letter of each word triggers the name of the cell. N for neutrophils, L for lymphocytes, M for monocytes, and you get the rest. Easy.
Real learning isn't something that's just stuck inside a classroom or a library. To truly master a subject like A&P, you've got to find ways to bring the material out into your everyday life.
The key here is to make all this information feel real. So when you're at the gym, don't just say you're working on your arms. Talk about working your biceps and your triceps. Use the actual terminology. It makes it so much more practical. And also actively hunt down practice questions and study guides. Testing yourself is one of the absolute best ways to figure out what you don't know before it's too late and you're sitting in the actual exam.
So after all these tips and tricks and hacks, what's the big picture here? What's the ultimate takeaway as you go on your journey through anatomy and physiology?
We've just walked through 11 powerful, practical, and proven strategies. From prepping before class all the way to using funny stories to remember muscle groups. Look, these aren't just abstract theories. These are real, actionable steps you can start using today to completely change how you study. But honestly, beyond any single technique, the most powerful tool you have is your mindset. Yeah, A&P has a tough reputation, but you can't let that intimidate you. If you go into it with confidence and a positive attitude, and you use these strategies, you are going to do great in this class.
You know, at the end of the day, learning how to learn is the real skill you're building here. This isn't just about passing one tough class. It's about developing study habits and techniques that are going to help you for your entire career. So think about it. Which one of these creative hacks are you excited to try first?